there are several points here. Humanity first showed up as a game mechanic by name in the game Cyberpunk in 1989, which incidentally was deeply influential on me in the early phases of writing Sorcerer. I actually tried putting a number of these ideas into practice as cyberpunk mechanics at one point, very early on. And the interesting thing I quickly found was the way that they dealt with humanity was that, first of all, as you dropped, it was easier to lose. Number one. And it was very quantitative. The amount of this cyber tech that you implanted into your body dropped your humanity by specific amounts.
Mm.
And in
I've
the original game, it was
I've
actually
seen it later iterations of
right. It
this and
was
things
much
kind
more
of proceeding
ferocious in the.
Cyberpunk.
It was much more ferocious in the early game. I mean, you really couldn't afford to have much cyber tech. The other important point about it was that it codified behavior. If you had humanity 5, you acted like this. You had humanity 4, you acted like this. You had humanity 3, you acted like this, and it went down. And strangely enough, the more the less humanity you had, the more likely you were to behave in ways or want more cyber tech and stuff like that.
Huh.
So therefore, I saw it as ultimately not very interesting. And I also was very interested in how cyberpunk had basically died as soon as it was born. That the genre had become nothing but a celebration of its own tropes, and that some of the initial stories seemed to be celebrated for their imagery or their particular little memes, as we would later call these things, but they weren't really discussed or talked about as stories. And I was
Sure.
interested in some of the topics of those early stories, and a lot of them had to do with this business of a much more, yes, it's screwing me in ways that other people would like me to be, but I have my reasons. And the ultimate overriding morality of the fact that you all just want me to be a certain way may not actually be my top priority here.
Mm.
So those interested me as well. They seemed of a piece with the older sword and sorcery stuff. So, but I saw that game mechanic and I was like, that game mechanic is just operating on sort of a check to make sure you don't get, quote, too effective with all the cyber stuff. That's not, that's not that interesting.
It's not a kicker.
Right. And so Vampire came out, and Vampire used a mechanic at the time which was extremely like humanity um, in Cyberpunk, and it also had the additional um, feature of frenzy. The less humanity, the easier you went into frenzy. You do things in frenzy, then you would get these checks to see whether your humanity drops. So, right, it's a race to the bottom. So that's
Um,
why, I mean, in thinking a lot about this, I really focused on the idea that for the humanity gain rolls and the humanity checks in Sorcerer, they're always 50%. There isn't, having, and also more importantly, even than that there was no stricture or encouragement or any discussion of your behavior relative to your humanity score. You were capable
mm.
of all potential acts at this moment. You could play your character as you wanted to play them, regardless of your humanity score. And that leads to this led actually to a rather staunch Christian gamer of my acquaintance at the time saying that he thought that Sorcerer was the most Christian game he had encountered. Because
I could actually see that.
right, yeah, from his perspective, he was saying what the way he put it was this is a game where you can in fact do all the right things um and not go up on humanity. The dice just don't let you go up. And vice versa. You can get away with a lot of shit if you just keep it's the same roll. Nobody said that 50% has to go your way or go 50% for you. So therefore, um, that element was I say, was in fact new. And that's where I get sort of this existential confrontation of what I want, how I'm doing it. For better or worse, I am freaking here for however long it is that I'm here. I may be tiny in scale, but or as one could put it, um, I may be, a speck, but there is actual mass and energy here, however much of it.
Sure.
So therefore, that I find to be probably the strongest philosophical core of what I was driving at with Sorcerer, and why, to me, the demons are more like they're not in genre inhabitants. It's why I keep talking about the demons don't exist.
Yeah.
The idea being that whatever the setting is, you're breaking it by being a sorcerer. You're not just, oh, there's demons. Oh, how do you bind them? It's much more like there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
In this fiction, there shouldn't be. And so addressing that, taking away the idea that improvement is ipso facto what we're here to do, survival and improvement. Instead, having this notion of the kicker, having the kicker be player authored but GM owned and developed. A lot of those things, you can see a lot of these things working together. I'm completely working against the idea that anybody is going to control the outcome. That this guitar does not play itself, nor do we sit and listen while one person plays the guitar. So those phrasings are new, but that's very much what I was working from, especially from my play experiences in the late 80s and early 90s. I knew that's what I was driving at. Does that make any
So
sense? We're sort of
that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense. My other question would be kind of a practical one. How do you find people to play games like this?
Well,
Because
first of all,
when I even just imagine myself like pitching a game to my normal gaming group, all of them would run. Or maybe one or two.
I've seen
but
it
it's
actually. There are okay. There are a couple of ways to look at this. The way that I've been looking at it now for a while is that instead of thinking of gaming groups as stable blocks, instead thinking in terms of people in them who may not identify as the gamers in the group. They may be there as romantic partners of somebody who does so self identify. And they may be there as some other form of buddy or some other form of participant, but may even be characterized by playing fairly utility support basic characters in kind of a I'm here to get along sort of way. Surprisingly, perhaps, it is exactly those people who will sink their teeth into a game like Sorcerer harder than you are. Because they, in many cases, experience that same sense of, there's something here. If only I could find the people to do it. Then there is, I think, a far larger group of people who do not participate in the role playing hobby or its associated hobby stuff, or the larger subculture that role playing has sort of been in, but who either played a little bit a long time ago or have heard about it and were kind of curious. And when it's mentioned around them with somebody who doesn't otherwise seem, defective in some way, I hate to say, They would say, you know, I've heard about this. I'm kind of, what is that? Because I'm kind of interested in that, or I've always wanted to do that, or hey, I did that a little bit in the high school. I always wanted to get back to that. Do you do that? And it may amuse you that in the 90s, post Satanic Panic, but also I think much more than the Satanic Panic, the deep discoolness, the deep decoolifying of gaming and role playing that had hit in the 80s very hard. In fact, I would say almost like night and day in a 6 month period early on. Um, and there's a reason for that too. But but that effect led to a closeting of role playing that is hilarious in retrospect. I mean, it literally was like you would be out and proud. You would say, "Yes, we are playing. I play this game. It's called Champions, and I play it every week. Yes, I do." And somebody would kind of like sidle up to you, right? Like a coworker or someone that you didn't know very well, kind of sidle up to you and go, "So you doing some role playing? You doing some role playing?" It had this kind of, really hilarious sort of drug dealing, gay culture sort of
Yeah.
closeting thing going on. And
I've
yeah. Mhm.
since COVID has hit, I got into role playing because of COVID, just because I was locked in with 8 people, and we figured, what the hell are we going to do? But since COVID has started, I've seen a mainstream catch on
Right.
in the most absolutely fucking hysterical
Right.
ways.
Right.
Like yeah,
Hmm.
um, that just I was walking through a store a few weeks ago, and there was these like two like very normal middle-aged women, and listening to them going like, so, and I could tell it was their first time. So we're getting a party. I think I'm a rogue and you're a warlock or something. But then also like, there's a biker bar down the street from me that I was at, and like smoking a cigarette and talking to a friend of mine, and these guys just tatted out to the knuckles,
Right. Yeah.
and doing that same kind of
And they're over there
saddling up.
talking about that saving roll they missed. So yeah, it is. I think there's lots of different things to talk about with this, but I think what I'm really driving at is that there really isn't any reason why a large number of people wouldn't like to do this,
Mm.
and that there is a fairly substantial number whom you probably know. And what I've
Yeah.
often found is that when I started playing Sorcerer with some people, and that set of people was a group, a few of them would leave. And a couple people who heard about it through the others joined. And
The
almost every good sorcerer group I had back then had that origin.
mm, um, I guess I'm as much asking because Sorcerer is a lot more collaborative than really. It's like the normal format is you as the GM are both kind of you're the storyteller, you're the rules
You are also the
referee,
deliverer of the
you're
nature
also
of
the
the fiction.
social moderator
Right.
and actually making sure nobody gets hurt.
Right. There.
And that has it's fine, but it's not it's not what Sorcerer is.
Right. And
Um,
the idea here, of course, is to break the idea. I actually have a video called this losing the right there. If we want to have asymmetric knowledge among regarding the fiction among members of the group, if we want to have asymmetric distribution of specific rules, asymmetric distribution of what I call the authorities about who actually nails down things that happen. Um, so that in many cases they're concentrated in a given person. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a way to organize the instrumentation. But to confound that with two other things. One is to be the massager of how it goes so that it turns out in a way that that person wants to deliver it. Another thing is whether that person is socially in charge of the others. Those two things I'm basically just separating out into different variables and saying the
Mm.
medium doesn't care. The medium doesn't care how you organize those things.